I'm going to have Martha just tell people briefly about MediaX and what it is at Stanford, and hopefully we can do more of these together. I think that'd be really exciting. But I'm glad this came together. So Martha Russell's here from Stanford, the MediaX program, and I'll let her explain what that is. David Armano, probably many of you know from Edelman, been involved in digital and emerging for quite a long time. So I've known David for a little while as well, so I'm glad you were able to make it out. I didn't even know you two knew each other, so small world. So I'll let you take it off.
All right, thanks. If I can move over to the slides we're using this morning, that would be great. It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much. MediaX at Stanford University is an industry-facing program to bring the best questions from the business community into Stanford University's labs. We work in Silicon Valley in agile innovation, open innovation environment, tapping about 36 labs and about 100 researchers at Stanford who are interested in the intersection of people and information technology in a media context. So I claim some responsible for educating the next wave of disruptors. What we do with the MediaX Discovery collaborations is create opportunities for people from the business environment to come to Stanford and meet the faculty and the students while they're thinking about the ideas before those ideas leave Stanford in startup companies. So it gives you some time advantage. And I'm very happy to be here this morning with one of our member companies, Edelman. And I'll ask David to introduce himself and to kick off the program this morning as we want to tap the energy that we heard yesterday, the sense of alarm and of confidence in the innovation and the value chains that are emerging. So, David.
Yeah, so we're going to make this interactive. Yesterday was there was a lot of talking at you guys. I know it's not the sometimes not the most promising thing, like, what is it, just after 8 in the morning, and to get you guys talking, but we're going to do it anyway. There's a lot of great conversation yesterday. Just to follow on to what Martha was saying about MediaX, Edelman is one of the partner companies. And along the lines of the theme that we're going to talk about, there is a lot of disruption happening in the business space. I came to Edelman. Edelman's a really unique company. It's 61 years old. There's almost about 5,000 of us now. When I came to Edelman, the digital practice was just under 200, and it's about 1,000 now. And it's a company that is constantly evolving. It's sort of always in beta, it always reinvents itself. A lot of people give Edelman the credit of sort of pioneering what is has now become public relations, but in reality, if you work for Edelman, you know that what we do is so much more diverse and in way more areas than that. We've done a lot in digital with social marketing and strategy, and we're just expanding. So there's some alignment in the sense that we want to cover some ground on the idea of how organizations are evolving, what some of the threats are out there, what some of the opportunities are out there, and we really want to get you guys talking about that. So we really have some sort of thought starter slides. But again, we want to get you guys chatting a little bit about it. There were some themes that emerged yesterday. I mean, we kind of started talking about, there's a lot of conversation about the role of the chief digital officer. I think that you can make the argument that digital by nature is highly disruptive. It's a catalyst. It's changing industries, and the media industry have, I'm sorry I'm forgetting the name, but woman from the New York Times. Yeah, I think you've probably been at ground zero of that, right? For several years now. So it's highly disruptive. So one of the things I did when we were kind of riffing on this presentation and putting a few slides together was I Googled the phrase early warning signals, because I think that when you're in a space that's highly disruptive and highly dynamic, I think the sort of common sense thinking is, can you sort of see the signals, right? Are there sort of signs telegraphed that there is disrupting happening? And I came across this model. This is actually a process, a strategic early warning system process, and it was really interesting. It kind of mapped out a very sequential, linear, kind of rigorous process of how you detect these signals, starting from what's the short-term prognosis? What does this mean to our business in the short term? And then you sort of move into let's monitor trends. Right, let's actually see if these are real and if these are things that we need to be paying attention to. And then you start to map multiple scenarios against it. Like, okay, if these trends are real, then these are the different ways the scenarios can play out.
And let me just jump in here.
Please
because
do,
I think
Martha.
that one of the things that characterizes our current context is the acceleration of change. We have change, we have a lot of change, but the rate at which it's happening is accelerating. And so if you imagine the butterfly effect, and you all know that that refers to a change happening in one part of the world or in one part of the industry, rippling through and creating a massive tsunami of change, we have now many butterfly effects happening at the same time. So it's like a chaotic chaos in its best and worst sense of butterfly effects.
So another way to say that is, ain't nobody got time for that, right? The change is just happening at a highly accelerated pace. How many of you use Uber? Have used? Do use it? Okay, a lot of you. I mean, look, these are the sort of, and this, what's happening goes by a number of names. The share economy, there's a peer, who I had out here, collaborative economy. We're essentially not unlike what happened with sort of the first .com, where sort of, the Amazons of the world, the eBays of the world, they created new economic models. It's happening all over again. And what's really interesting is that several trends are coming together doing that. So on my Uber ride over here yesterday, I got to talking to the driver, and I just started asking him about how he got into being a driver. And at the end of the day, it was the economic reality of the situation. He had been let go of his job, couldn't find anything else, looked in the ads for some jobs, found basically a position to drive that was someone who was running sort of an Uber business, so multiple cars, and now he's a part of that growing economy, right? So it's technology, it's societal, right? It's economic, it's all these sort of things coming together to then create new models, and then you add into the mix, you have some kind of quasi old digital money like Google supporting that, and it becomes a highly disruptive business model.
It's an agile mindset above all.
Yeah.
Another example of that is happening in higher education. For many years, we have observed disruption and have studied it. But it's happening very much in higher education in the past couple of years, and Stanford's been a leader in that. With the massive open online courses that have developed. And how that happened was so interesting because Sebastian Thrun, Mark Andreessen referred to him last night, and Udacity, which is the company, the current name of the company that he created a couple of years ago. It started with a couple of professors working together. Sebastian Thrun has for many years, he's an AI specialist in the computer science department. For many years, he and his student teams have won the DARPA Grand Challenge of creating the autonomous vehicle. So he is pals with Peter Norvig, the data scientist at Google. They team teach a class, they have over the past couple of years, and they decided, well, let's do something different. Let's put our lectures into video, and then we'll have people watch the video and come to class. And then we'll have discussions in class. We'll work on problems together and be richer for all of us. We'll have a good time. They began recording their lectures, and they liked what they had done. They said, hey, this is pretty good. Let's actually let a lot of people watch it. And so they redeveloped the platform that they were planning to use to disseminate the videos. And they said, but we kind of like to know who's watching it. So they developed a system to allow people to register. And so this is, the platform's in its second iteration. They put a few words out to colleagues, and in 10 days, they had over 100,000 people signed up to take the class. And they said, we have to redevelop the platform again. So they're on their third iteration of the platform. Meanwhile, other people, word travels, and the computer science department said, hey, that's a good idea. We'd like to do that too. They said, our platform won't support it. I'm sorry, we can't take you on. They said, okay, well, we'll do it ourselves. And that was Andrew Ng and Daphne Kohler. And they developed another platform in which they taught their class. So there are a few people in the entrepreneurship and innovation area who say, well, that's a good idea. We'd like to do that. They say, well, I'm sorry, we can't. We're full. They say, okay, we'll develop our own. So we have, in the first fall, 3 different platforms supporting about 5 classes at Stanford. No one yet had talked to administration and said, can we do this? Over 300,000 students, people around the world took these classes in the first iteration, and before fall quarter was finished, 2 had VC funding. Udacity was one of those, Sebastian Thrun, and Coursera was the other. And the other had a proposal into the National Science Foundation. Stanford's president says, that's fine. Let's see what happens. Let the market give us the feedback. We'll keep all of the experiments going. And about 9 months into the experiment, a group of people at the University Faculty Committee was assembled to say, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, our core business is insight and understanding. Let's study it. We have all this data that's coming from the way that people on their own volition come into and out of looking at video online about topics that they have chosen to participate in. Can we study it from the standpoint of big data and what it means for audience engagement, for attrition, for retention of interest? And so a new lab was set up to do that. And actually some of those insights, which are very interesting in the educational context, I think when they, and they're coming out now, the results are coming out now, will be very interesting for the media industry. So let 1,000 flowers bloom, see what grows. Disruption is happening. And as you heard yesterday from Mark Andreessen, Udacity has been acquired and has moved from being the premier college online course to a role that is more like e-learning for professional training. Mm-hmm. I'd like to also just say something about the Founders Club because Mark also mentioned Kickstarter, and I think that's really interesting. Kickstarter allows you to pre-purchase products before they're made. That's kind of interesting in terms of the value chain, isn't it? But you don't get a share of the company if the company does well. You get the product, of course, but you don't get a share of the company. A new innovation is the Founders Club. And what this does is allows founders of new companies to exchange their founders' share for equity in a collaborative investment organization in which all of the investors are qualified, but it's at a much lower level than needing $500,000 to get in. And the founders of companies can trade their shares for participation in this. You do get actual stock shares for that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to upset Kickstarter.
So we do have plenty of more content to go through, but I want to make good to a couple of promises. I did say that I wanted to make this interactive, and I also promised Chris Miller that I was going to put him on the spot, so I'm going to do that. So Chris and I have known each other for a while. Chris made an interesting move in that he's been an agency guy for his entire career, and he has just recently moved into a role at Abbott. And I wanted to kind of get, Chris, some thoughts from you on space.
Wow, I have not had enough coffee to have this discussion yet. I'm sure there's other people like that.
You have a great radio voice this
like
morning.
That? Yeah, that's staying up till 2 a.m. Ian Wolfman, all right, you're not here. He was the troublemaker last night. No, I think to David's point, I 20 years in the agency side, Leo Burnett, Omnicom, Draft FCB at IPG. And now I've been 2 months at Abbott in a newly created role to really relaunch Abbott as a global brand. So we're the sort of $60 billion healthcare company most people have never heard of. And I think to your point about disruption is that they sort of took the chance on creating sort of this corporate marketing department, hiring a CMO about 9 months ago, bringing an agency guy like me in, the CMO telling me, keep your agency-ness, because that's what we need to change. And so while my role is really around global branding, it is also around the only way to get there is also about changing the organization. And so while that's the unofficial side of it, to me, and maybe throughout my career, but I think in businesses they really go hand in hand, because you can't do great marketing unless your organization also steps into that as well. And I think especially as to what you're talking about at what's happening out here in the Valley is that the organizations outside of here have to take a little bit of those pieces, and that's kind of what I'm excited to be here in the conversation to do that.
Cool.
How about others? Are there others who are experiencing disruption that you're willing to talk about?
We have one right over here. Yeah? Anybody else? Oh, you're helping us. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Come on, this is meant to be a conversation.
It's business as usual for everybody here.
Yeah,
That's why you've
everything's
taken
fine.
2 days to come out to Palo Alto.
Okay, great. Yep.
I'm David Kang. I'm Chief Digital Officer at Wenner Media, and we publish Rolling Stone, Us Magazine, and Men's Journal. And I've been in the role as Chief Digital Officer for about 2 years now, and I think that it's very similar to some of the other discussions we've had, like from the New York Times and what's happening in print from our colleagues over at Condé, that it is a legacy business, if we'll call it that, that is still highly profitable. And in fact, this year was a really good year for print overall, which is somewhat contrary to what the doom and gloom might have said even 12 months ago. And in a funny way, it makes the challenge to change towards the digital model more challenging, because it's like it reaffirms the value of the legacy business. But on the other hand, it creates resources and perhaps buys you more time to be able to do the transformation. So one of the good things that we're able to do is to really focus on where the economic opportunities are. And so, like a lot of traditional publishers, Wenner did not adopt programmatic advertising because of the fear of cannibalizing of direct sales. And so finally, through a lot of convincing, we were able to do it this year, and it has completely transformed the economics of the digital business, where we were able to monetize the bulk of the inventory which had gone unmonetized. And we're now leaping forward and doing things like private marketplace exchanges, et cetera. Companies focus on money, and to be able to bring in a new unbudgeted revenue stream and then to build success around that, I think is something that has built credibility and given us momentum going forward. But short of that, I had a lot of predecessors in the role. None of them brought in the money, and they didn't last very long. So it's a very realpolitik kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. I want to summarize a couple of awesome points that you made there, because that was a really good sort of dump of anecdotal information. That's really so the legacy. I think the legacy was huge, right? And I see that in my industry a lot as well. When you're working in a space where the trend is sort of maybe a gradual decline, or even if it's static, but revenue's still coming in, it is a double-edged sword. Like how you put that, it's sort of it enables it, right? Or kind of in a way kind of slows you down, but also can fund sort of where you need to be a little bit more on the offense. And I also like where you ended up with by saying that you've had predecessors, but it sounds like you're really trying to make your role tie it to financial impact, which I think is key.
I think of it really as a business role rather than a digital role per se.
Yep.
Because unless we're able to transform it into a significant profit center, then why bother doing it? Because again, just to take a deeper dive in Rolling Stone, it's a big iconic brand, and you could imagine doing a myriad of things, from television shows to movies to restaurants to concert tours, etc. And the bottom line on it is that can you do that and make money?
Yeah.
And as it turns out, it's a lot trickier. And so that there's a certain kind of focus on that, very ROI driven. And again, in digital, it's usually the opposite case, where you're investing, and hoping that the money comes in. And again, because we had an under-monetized asset, and again, we're still trying to get the 360 going with the publishers. Yesterday I was surprised that there wasn't more discussion about working with the editors, because that role and the whole, the preciousness and the credibility, et cetera, and that partnership, all of those things are evolving as we're trying to go to a more brand-centric, as opposed to, the magazine is making money, and now finally, digital is making some money. So, it's a very fluid kind of situation, and it's early days, but again, the company had outsourced almost all of its digital activities to real networks until probably 3 or 4 years ago. And the other thing kind of buried into this is that you learn a lot from mistakes. Mm-hmm. And when you outsource, you get the advantage of not having the risk, but you're not learning anything either.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of catching up, I think, that's happened in the last couple of years for the company.
Great.
That's a fantastic comment on failure, the importance of failure. And I think that people look at Silicon Valley and they see the successes, but for every success there are hundreds, maybe thousands of failures. The attitude, though, is that failure provides information for the coming success. And so failing fast is the motto. Sharing what you learn in the failure so that others can use the information. Don't go it alone and get up and do it again right away. Fast cycles, fast learning cycles.
So to go back to the idea of sort of, maybe like what signals are organizations sending out there? What are some of the ways, even if they're just really little ways that you can begin to sort of manage some of the disruption? One is join them. Find the disruptors and just make sure that you're a part. We're going to talk about ecosystems in a little bit, right? Make sure you're a part of their ecosystem. So just this week, PayPal announced that now you can use their payment systems through Uber, right? I mean, it's very small, but and their disclaimer, they're a client. When this news went out, though, we were monitoring the reactions on it. There was so much positive response to this. So really kind of small. I mean, makes a lot of sense. Very pragmatic. But in some ways, it's sort of symbolic, right? That the PayPal is smart about going after that and getting it operationalized and getting it done. Other ways to sort of become a little bit more like the disruptors, and not that unlike. So you heard People Actual last night, and he had his sort of team of 2 here that are in their Silicon Valley outpost for Nestle, right? So that's a way that they're having conversations with a lot of the businesses out here, meeting with them, trying to figure out if there are ways to partner, if there are shared learnings. It's a small effort, but it's a critical one. They're not the only ones, and that's the food industry. And another CPG company that's doing something similar is Mondelez. They're out here a lot. They have a lot of involvement.
And not just from the U.S. This area is filled with small offices of 2 or 3 people who have come from around the world either to start a company to see if they can get funding for what they are doing, or who come to have, I call, a scout post. It's not exactly an outpost. It's a scout post, looking, listening, feeding information back. The tough thing is that the culture is so different here, and what is perceived receptive in a positive way in Silicon Valley may be just very difficult to understand when you take it back to, even Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so. The Mondelez example is kind of interesting, in where they brought together startups in the mobile space, knowing that they needed to make progress there, knowing that the consumer base is, even when they're shopping, they're in the aisles with their mobile phones. They're increasingly using mobile as a part of their lives to make the decisions on what they buy, what brands they actually have an affinity with. And so that is a way, it's a starting point. It's a way to begin to sort of get in front of that.
Just a tip for those who might be interested in doing something like that and sending some people out to Silicon Valley. It works a lot better if you actually get involved. And get involved, meaning that if you're looking at the new companies that are being created, actually participate in helping them get started. There are a couple of many different accelerator incubator programs. One that Time Warner has that I think is quite interesting is called CAMP. And established companies, you have to have the company underway in order to apply for this, but they select about a dozen companies to come in for a 10-week program. They give them a little bit of money. And in that 10-week program, they teach them about the Time Warner companies and how to pitch to the Time Warner companies. So they are cultivating an ecosystem without making investments, but in giving a competition and creating an educational program to help them become part of their ecosystem. A lot of different models for accelerators, but establishing a relationship is critical.
Yep. Another is, and anyone who works for a large organization, this isn't, this is just, you can't get around this, right? When you're talking about big organizations, at some point it becomes organizational evolution, organizational change, It's slow, it's painful, it's the messy stuff. It oftentimes takes years for large organizations, but it has to be done. One of the words that I've kind of fallen in love with, and I hear it kind of popping up now and then, and I just do think it's appropriate, is responsive. It even came up yesterday, with a lot of the discussions around sort of, automating advertising, responsive advertising, and advertising that can sort of be more nimble, kind of be, work in a responsive environment. Something changes and the ads change. In development, in web development, a lot of developers now work in a framework that's called responsive design. So they, in lieu of developing an app, especially if it's more of a content play, they develop, the source code in a way that it basically just adapts to the environment. Whether it's desktop, it looks great on desktop. Tablet looks great on tablet. Mobile looks great on mobile. And it's really one piece of code. And I've written about this a bit. And then in some research, I came across this sort of manifesto that was out there. I think it was led by an individual named Stowe Boyd, if any of you know him. He kind of does a lot of thinking in the enterprise space. And this manifesto is called The Responsive Organization. And I said, oh, they're kind of taking that premise and thinking about it from organizational dynamics, And there's some really, this is something that we talked about a lot, but I think it's still true. The way that they kind of laid it out is organizations have been built on efficiency. So how do you begin to, migrate that into being responsive, responsiveness, adaptive, agile? From traditional hierarchies, right, to a lot of these business models that we talked about, they start off in networks. Great recent example, I was talking to Pete Blackshaw last night, and he talked about how Nestle's using Chatter internally, and he kind of like evaluates some of the employees that way. And he said something that's just kind of a small thing, but I thought it was really key. He said, we spend a lot of money with Facebook, and what's great is that through Chatter, we actually have them engaging directly with our employees, and there's a lot of great, conversations that happen. They have direct access, hundreds of employees engaging with people on Facebook. And I was like, that's really key, because now what you did is you went from employee to now you're bringing in, again, we talk about ecosystem, you're bringing in an external partner in a secure environment, enterprise environment, and there's a value exchange happening. So he just kind of said it really casual. It's like, I don't think a lot of big organizations are doing that, and it actually makes a lot of sense. From controlling to empowering. That's actually a great example right there. Someone could say, hey, Chatter's our internal, sort of intranet 2.0. We don't want partners on that. But, that's where you can begin to sort of elevate the value exchange.
I just stay on empower for a minute, because
Yep.
I think that is one of the critical words for the next 10 years, whether it has to do with media or whether it has to do with organizations. The permeability of boundaries everywhere, I think, means that the abundance that we're looking for comes through empowering people to do what they want to do. There is some persuasion that can encourage them to go in various directions, of course, but empowerment as a mantra, I think, is for inside the organization and for outside the organization. The way that digital becomes part of people's very existence.
Mm-hmm. So I said we were going to be talking about using this word ecosystem a bit, I think one of the big changes that you see as well is organizations, brand, businesses that are beginning to sort of David, as you mentioned, kind of you've got this sort of protect the sort of core business, but then look for those new models. I feel like in the media industry, that's happening a lot. And so there's kind of like three sort of main areas where you can begin to ask questions about if you can add value in that. And there's a lot of marketers here, right? So you'll relate to sort of, this is one of the older models of, can you begin to sort of provide a platform? Even if you're in marketing, can you actually develop a platform that people really, it's not just about, sharing a message, but they begin to, engage with your brand in a way that adds value to them. So one of the sort of big case studies that we've always talked about, but it is a good one, is what Nike started doing with Nike Plus and now has evolved into FuelBand, right? Where they have basically developed a platform, and it's fueled, no pun intended, by technology. But that's one of the things that they have in place that really kind of keeps that brand at the forefront. It really is a platform-based system. I think
looking at
Yep.
how you can motivate a marketplace, I think of the way that music made iPod a good product, and the way that the App Store carried the iPad.
Yeah. The App Store is actually, we talked about this last night. The App Store, how many of you had the first gen iPhone? Okay. I've been at an Apple, I've used Apple products for a while, I know a little bit of Apple. Apple is all about control. Like, Steve Jobs is a control freak, and he's a big fan of design, and I'm a designer in background, and designers like to control the experience. And so I'm fairly sure that when the iPhone first came out, it was about controlling the experience. But what happened was the phone started getting jailbroken, and apps were being created outside the control of Apple. And it took about a year, but the App Store marketplace was put in, and it was messy for that year. There was a lot of complaints about it. Apple didn't want to go there. They actually wanted to control the apps and make the apps themselves. And somewhere, and I don't know who, somewhere within Apple, someone said, this is going to be a losing proposition. We have to go with this. And oh, by the way, let's create a marketplace so we can benefit, put standards in place that work for Apple, and they're high standards, right? And then, oh, by the way, as an incentive for people to create apps that are high quality, they'll get compensated, we get a lot of value, and it's that value exchange, right? So that is a marketplace. And a lot of people don't talk about the App Store that way, and it was counter to the way Apple operates as a business.
Actually, we've been studying that system and the free versus paid and how that can be played. If you're interested in that, I'd be glad to send you a paper.
Yeah, and then offering a service. I feel like the gentleman from Unilever yesterday with Project Sunlight begins to sort of, kind of head into that area by kind of creating a community where you get value from that. And again, it's not just putting out messages to your consumers. That can become a valuable service to you. It's community, but the end result is, that becomes a service to the consumer, and it's aligned with their purpose, which is kind of interesting. So we're gonna try to hand it back over a little bit. I think. Any thoughts coming to mind? Can you guys relate to this? Does anybody feel like they're either on one end of the spectrum or not, where their industry is in the process of being disrupted, or you guys are the ones sort of driving the disruption and are taking the steps and sort of the bold moves and doing the hard work, creating new opportunities?
We're not far from the ocean here, and if you go down to one of the nice beaches, you can wade in, and you can feel the waves wash over however far you go. If you go in up to your knees, you can feel the strength of the waves begin to push you down. If you get very far in, the waves will lift you off and take you. But the other way to be in is to surf those waves and to get on top. And that's a different position against the forces, going with the forces. So against and with the forces, how are you taking these waves of innovation?
Good morning, I'm Michael, I'm with MasterCard. And this kind of really resonates with me about being disrupted and certainly trying to disrupt. And what I say by that, I think is, we process about almost $4 trillion worth of electronic payments every single year. But yet 85% of the world's transactions are still in cash. So while lots of people are trying to disrupt our model, at the end of the day, 85% of the world is still there for the grabbing. So, our model is very different than a lot of our competitors in the fact that rather than fight over the 15%, we're going after the 85%. So an awful lot of our efforts aren't necessarily here in our backyard where everyone has the ability to pay via electronics, but going after opportunities in other parts of the world, such as in sub-Saharan Africa, where payments and electronic payments and even card payments don't even exist, and enabling these parts of the world to get into the business in the first place.
Yeah, and ultimately, the pathway to abundance is not so much fighting about share in the world as we know it now, but increasing the pie for everyone. And the developing market offers, the developing countries offer such an important opportunity for that, because quite frankly, if 9 billion people are going to coexist peacefully on the world by 2050,
Michael, I want to ask
a lot of change is necessary.
I want to ask a follow-up question. We had a couple of interesting little sidebars. Do you feel like in your industry, do you feel like you had mentioned something along the lines of like, hey, a lot of this is on the product side. Do you feel like there is a sort of hard line between product and marketing when it comes to this space? Where within your industry, the innovation is going to happen on the product side? Like, you're going to get more of that share by really kind of innovating mainly on the product side, or do you see any sort of gray areas in between?
I see lots of gray area,
Okay.
and I think you can build the best products in the world, but if you can't market them, they never come to light. So I think it's a very collaborative effort to actually bring those products to light. I think what's more interesting is, companies, our competitors and ourselves are trying to predict the future, and thus trying to build with people don't necessarily know that they want or need. And as I said, the zig that we're taking while others are zagging is kind of going after the 85 versus the 15, which means we're actually focusing on products that you likely don't necessarily need here in the U.S., certainly in Palo Alto, but you may desperately need in sub-Saharan Africa, to enable government payments to people, to enable peer-to-peer. So not necessarily what you may think of as far as a credit card business from a consumer to merchant.
Great. All right, we have 2 minutes left, so maybe one more. Sure. Thank you.
Just going to build on what Mike was saying about marketing. The fastest growing, I think, distribution channel for micro insurance in Africa is telephone companies. Who have no customers who have a contract. They're all prepaid cards, so they have a horrible churn problem. So they're giving away free life insurance as a royalty, as a loyalty reward, and then as a freemium product that they began to sell other contracts on top of that. But it's totally driven by the go-to-market mechanism. It's not the product at all.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one.
That's great. I would just I think we're going to wrap up, and I'll let David have the last word, but I would like to encourage you to keep your eye on a couple of things. And one is that in the design of new systems, that allowing people, empowering digital self-determination becomes really important. Thinking of what would be the digital, a bill of human digital rights. What rights do people, as people, have in terms of controlling their own identity, which is social, which is dynamic, which changes from time to over a lifespan, and the ability to control identity and to respect identity, I think, begins in the very early stages of product design. So those of you who are developing products and services, respect the and empower the identity of people. I think the other thing I would encourage you, two other things, are the intersection between artificial and human intelligence, and we're working on artificial intelligence, and we have a legacy of human intelligence that we're bringing in. We're trying to make that a little bit better, getting to better decisions. But the trade-off and the signals for when the artificial intelligence has reached its maximum contribution and we need to bring the humans back into it, it is a very important point in these automated systems. The third thing to keep your eye on is sensors. MediaX co-sponsored recently a Trillion Sensors Summit, and we're looking by 2020 at the kinds of product innovations that will deliver a trillion sensors to the market by 2020. Some of those are going to be in media, and you can imagine with the ability to lay very tiny circuits onto paper, that when you open, it might be a Rolling Stone, the music plays. Sensors will be embedded everywhere.
I would end simply on one point. I'm going to go back to where I started with the idea of signals. Be purposeful with the signals that you're sending out, both externally and internally. And I'll give you an example. We recently hired on an individual from Viviki named Chris Paul, who's a very, very well-respected name in programmatic advertising. And one of the reasons why you would think, well, why would someone like that come to a PR firm? It's because of the signals that we're sending out, both internally and externally, and how we're kind of evolving our business. It's actually one of the things that drew me to Edelman years ago. As they were sending out those similar signals in the social space. So be purposeful, both internally and externally, because that is sort of how you begin to manage the change. It's what attracts the right talent to your organization who are necessary to help make the changes.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks for your participation today.